Now let's talk a little bit about our bike project before we get started. So I know you're anxious to get started actually building our project. Let's take just a few minutes to talk about the bike before we start building it. So this is kind of the project that we're going to be building, and the idea for the way that we're going to be building this is that we're going to try to use a lot of different types of tools and a lot of different types of geometry. So, as you start to find out what you like to work with, you're probably going to find that you work with those kinds of tools and those kinds of that kind of geometry more often. So some people may like to build a lot of the pieces with NURBS. Some people may like to build this whole thing with polygons, and that's something that you'll find out for yourself. The idea for this is that we want to try to just expose you to a number of different tools so that you can kind of make that decision, figure out what it is that you like, and how the different tools and how the different types of geometry work and can work together. Okay, so we're going to be using things like NURBS curves and lofts for things like the frame. We'll look at converting geometry. Once we've got a NURBS piece, we can convert those and combine those into polygon objects so that we can do some modifications like cutting out this hole here, for instance. Okay, we'll look at some of the ways that we can create sort of interlocking pieces here for, you can see how that kind of goes inside and interlocks with this piece, how we can do that, how we can create these sharper edges along with these smooth curves inside here. How we can create a configuration of objects like this where they're all the same object, but we can duplicate those in a very quick way to get something that looks like that, so that we don't have to place them individually. We'll look at adding things like text to our project. All right, we'll look at adding things like our break line, how we can do that by adding geometry along a curve. All right, different ways of building. You can see this is sort of a combination of sharp edges and smooth lines with a little bit of creasing on the front there. So we can look at using a loft for that, maybe doing some conversion. We can look at using extracting geometry, so maybe taking these handlebars and just extracting pieces of them to make these pieces, sort of grip pieces that fit onto the handlebars already. All right, and we'll look at how we can cut out some holes out of our geometry very quickly using booleans. Okay, how we can extrude all of these faces at once and get that look with just one kind of action there. All right, so we'll touch on a lot of polygon techniques. We'll touch on some NURBS techniques, a little bit of subdivision. The smoothing workflow is going to come in handy, and we're going to be constantly using that. And so just want to let you get an idea of the kind of model that we're going to be building here. We'll set it up in a hierarchy so that we can come in and rotate the pieces appropriately, so that we can, let's actually set up from our last lesson, but if we take this one, you can see that we can set that up so that we can rotate it appropriately, so the tires will rotate, so the pedals will rotate, and so forth. Okay, this is sort of we've got more of a typical wheel on the front. The back is kind of one of the hubless wheels that you might see around, where we've got this actually rotating around this rim here. So just something a little bit more unusual for this bike project. All right, so again, we're going to be actually using an image plane to build this. So if you want to get it exact and try to match up the look exactly what we're doing. Otherwise, if you want to have a little fun and use a little creative license, you can create a bike that's sort of more your own look and still use the same techniques that we're using. Just don't put them in the same spots. Maybe make them a little bit different and really make it your own. That's completely fine. The main point is that you learn how to use the tools, how they work together, and how they work on those particular types of geometry. All right. Now at the end, we'll spend just a very little bit of time actually adding a little bit of materials, some materials to our object, and then doing a quick render, so we get a nice image at the end rather than simply just a gray model. So that'll be just kind of a little added bonus that we'll get to do. So the next thing that we'll look at is importing our image planes. These are going to be reference images that we can use just to make our lives a little bit easier as far as matching up what I'm doing with what you're doing, and it's something that you can use as a modeler to really match up any kind of reference that you're trying to build to if you're trying to match something up. So we'll go into more detail on that in the next lesson.